All right. Hello, everybody. I am Wendy, and I'm a food anthropologist and the founder of Evolve.ag. My goal is to help people understand where their food comes from and also help humanize new technologies in food and food tech. So that way they don't just seem like there's some space age technology, but they're actually things that are relevant to consumers. So if you haven't checked out my site, it's Evolve.ag, and we have long form content on there as well as a podcast. And we cover topics that are all about current food issues like plastic food packaging or some of the myths that are surrounding organic. We also cover food trends and food technology. The podcast is available on all of the different platforms that podcasts are available on. So have a look and have a listen. Today, I've put together a panel of 6 experts who all have various experiences and backgrounds in different food and food traditions. And we're going to talk a little bit about how cell-based meat can fit into that. So I'm going to go ahead first and introduce all of our panelists. The first one is Deepika. And Deepika, if you want to go ahead and wave to the camera for everybody to see. She was born and raised in India, and Deepika is inspired by nature and its relationship to human nature. After graduating from university education, Deepika worked within the pharmaceutical industry, and this eventually led her to seek some fundamental questions about health. Today, she's an Ayurvedic doctor, a wellness educator, and an enthusiast of regenerative gardening. She's based in San Diego and often travels to Southeast Asia and Europe to teach in corporate and personal settings. She's inspired by nature and its relationship to the individual human experience. So thanks so much, Dee, for being a part of this. The second panelist we have is Sarah Chandler, aka Kahane Shamira. She is a Brooklyn-based Jewish educator, ritualist, artist, activist, and poet. She's the program director of Ramemu Yeshiva and a garden educator with Grow Torah. She teaches, writes, and consults on issues related to Jewish earth-based spiritual practice, farming, and mindfulness. Sarah is the previous Chief Compassion Officer and co-founder of the Jewish Initiative for Animals, which is a Jewish outreach program for the NGO Farm and Forward. Carrie Chan is the co-founder of Avant Meats, and they co-founded that back in 2018. They're using stem cell cultivation methods to create products like fish maw, which are tailored to Chinese consumers. Last October, they launched a prototype at the Future Food Summit in Hong Kong. And one of Avant Meats' main goals is to create meat and protein products in a pragmatic way to reduce harm to the environment and animals. So welcome, Carrie. Our next panelist is Veronica. She is a behavioral economist who spent the past decade analyzing consumer trends for food brands and government. She's also the co-founder of Grounded Foods, a company that makes plant-based cheeses for non-vegans using cauliflower and hemp seed. Then we have 2 more. We have Ahmed Abu Alez, who is a startup founder with a passion for democratizing access to the world of fitness. When he's not doing that, he works with other philanthropists to utilize technology to centralize solutions geared towards providing homeless individuals with the necessary services at their convenience. And lastly, we have Alex Shirazi, who hosts the Cultured Meat Show and the Future Food Show, a podcast dedicated to spreading the word about cellular agriculture technology. Alex is also the co-organizer of the Cultured Meat Symposium and founder of San Francisco-based Flint, a retail analytics firm analyzing shopper trends in brick and mortar stores. Alex studied advertising and brand design at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. And if you haven't listened to his Cultured Meat and Future Food Show podcast, I would highly recommend it, especially if you're really interested in this topic. He touches on all kinds of really cool subjects and has amazing interviews with people. So check that out. I'm going to turn it over now to Alex just to give a brief overview of cell-based meat and the cell-based meat industry. So take it away.
Great. Thank you for those introductions. I have a couple of bullet points that will give you a quick run through about what cell-based meat or cell-cultured meat or clean meat, cultivated meat, there are many names for it, about what what cultured meat actually is. So I guess the first question is like, how long has the cell-cultured meat industry been around? So we have seen reports of kind of like going into the early 19th century of different scientists doing this type of research, but it wasn't actually very popularized until the 80s, where someone from the Netherlands, Wilhelm van Alen, started really pushing government initiatives to invest more time, money, and resources into it. Shortly after that, there were a couple different experiments that NASA conducted in the early 90s. And then it was repopularized in 2013 when Sergey Brin, one of the Google co-founders, invested $1 million into a Dutch program for creating a cultured hamburger. And this is something that you might have seen a lot of news reports about and learned about. And that was with Dr. Mark Post from Meat and the University of Maastricht in the Netherlands. And so that's a little bit about the background of cultured meat and maybe when it kind of came back into market. If you think about that timeline, in 2015, I believe, the first cell-cultured meat company was founded, and that's Memphis Meats. And since then, we've seen a number of cultured meat companies or companies that are working in not only cellular agriculture, but cellular agriculture specifically for the production of meat founded since then as well. And so the big question everyone has is like, when can I expect that cell-cultured meat will be in the grocery store? And so there are very different opinions when it comes to these answers. Some people that are on the, I guess, entrepreneurial side are very eager to say that as early as 2021, we're probably going to have a burger, or excuse me, not a burger, but cell-cultured meat products out there. Already we're starting to see tastings of things like burgers and chicken nuggets on the news. But when you ask the scientific community, a lot of them are maybe a little bit less optimistic about these early timelines. And most people are thinking that maybe within the next decade, we're going to start seeing cell-cultured meat in the market. And I think that, ultimately it's safe to say that over the next maybe 3 to 5 years, there will probably be opportunities for exclusive tastings at maybe certain restaurants for very limited periods of time to go and try these different cell-cultured products. And in terms of the products, we see beef, poultry, seafood, and a variety of different types of companies attacking these different types of meats, including kangaroo with a new company that recently came out of Australia. They're about 2 years old now, actually, but a company out of Australia that's working on kangaroo. And so, so the process in which it's made, a lot of people ask, like, how is that cell-cultured burger made? A lot of people in the industry refer to the process as a similar process to beer. And so, for example, just as you brew beer, you can take that same kind of methodology and make meat. Well, it still sounds a little bit crazy or sci-fi. And essentially how it happens is there is a host animal, let's say in this scenario, a pig, and you take a small biopsy from that animal. The animal can still be alive and continue to live its life. And those cells are then put in a very nutrient-dense environment that mimics the actual environment of being in that animal. So, for example, there are a lot of different, there's a lot of different vitamins and minerals, and it's also at a temperature that's not unlike the temperature that is in the body of the animal. Then these cells start to multiply. And so they continue to grow. And once they grow, then they can be essentially harvested to some sort of form where we can actually consume them. So it sounds very scientific, but at the end of the day, we're just taking cells, growing cells, and then these cells are eaten in the same way you would eat any other type of meat. And so molecularly, they should be exactly the same. And so the last kind of point to touch on is cell-cultured meat more energy efficient? And I would say that it's maybe a little bit too early to say that it will be absolutely more energy efficient than traditional animal agriculture. Although as we continue to optimize the process, it sure looks like we will be getting to that point. There have been a couple articles, even papers published that talk about the efficiency, but it's really too early to tell because we haven't gotten to the very large and industrial scale to see what that will look like. There are a couple models out there that say that there will be efficiency not only in terms of energy consumption, but also in terms of price. So getting that to price parity, but it's still early days. And so that's just a quick wrap up of cell-cultured meat. So if you have any questions about it, definitely reach out.
Cool. Thanks so much, Alex. That was really, really helpful. One thing I wanted to add is that some research came out recently, just to kind of put this in perspective of things, about how much animals could be saved in theory if, once companies get to scale. And it's going to take a little while for a lot of these cell-based meat companies to come to scale. But basically, there was one model by a professor at UCLA who determined that to produce 1 billion quarter pounders of burgers, it takes 1.2 million cows. These cows live for 3 years on about 5,000 square miles of land, and then you slaughter them, and then you get your quarter pounder burgers. That same number of cultured burgers would require the stem cells of just one living cow, and they take only about a month and a half to grow. Now, again, this is the ideal. This is not where companies are at the moment, because it's going to take quite a bit of time for them to get to scale. As Alex said, maybe in 2021, we'll start seeing these foods in our grocery stores. But that's just an idea of what the cost savings is when you look at it from an animal perspective. The goal of most companies that are producing cell-based meat is to do as little harm as possible to animals while concurrently growing meat that has the same taste, the same nutrient density, and a much less environmental impact. Most of the people I spoke to in the industry have a goal that there are no animals harmed in the process and that we can move away from factory farming of meat. And that's like one of the things that's inspired them to do this. But as things are in research and development right now, there are a lot of animals being used for research. And in at least a few of these companies I've spoken with, the animals don't always survive. But the ultimate goal is to have cell-based meat companies that are able to produce meat at scale with a fraction of the animals, if any, being sacrificed. So that's just a little bit more background based on the topics that we're going to go through today. So I want to now turn it over to our panelists, and I'm going to have each of them answer just 2 questions. First, if they can share what their meat eating preferences are and why they hold those preferences, just basic why. And some of you are also experts in a particular philosophy or religion or an industry that relates to specific guidelines around eating meat. So if you could speak to that a little bit as well. For example, one of our panelists, Sarah, is both a vegan and a leader in the Jewish community. So she's going to speak about the Hebrew practice of eating kosher in addition to her own dietary preferences. And secondly, I'd love it if each of the panelists could also talk about how they think or don't think cell-based meat will or will not fit into their personal dietary preferences or their philosophies around food or their religion and the meat preferences there. Why or why not? So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to the panelists. And Deepika, do you want to go ahead and kick us off? Cool. I'm going to unmute you. Okay, you're good to go.
Hi, everyone. My name is Deepika. I'm based here in San Diego, and I am an Ayurvedic doctor, but along with it, I'm also a wellness educator. So my personal dietary preference in terms of meat is that I am new meat eater as of 3 years ago, when it was recommended to me by my allopathic doctor as I was recovering from a very tremendous, deep injury to my spinal column. And so prior to this, I used to be a vegetarian. I come from both culture and a religion where vegetarian diet is sort of the normal, even amongst those who will have meat. They will have meat maybe twice a week, but not every single day, which is sort of the common practices in other parts of the world. So where I am standing today is both as an Indian and as an American, as someone who's been a vegetarian and also somebody who is choosing to eat very clean meat at the moment. And I'm also coming from a standpoint of a human being in the current world dynamic that we find ourselves in. And so my personal perspective is that I am pro-meat eater for when it is necessary. and in the highest human format that it is available to us. So when I was requested to be on this panel, I was very, very excited because it is so widely misunderstood when it comes to practices of yoga and Ayurveda that these philosophies do not believe in eating meat, which is false. And so I want to also use this platform as my voice and share that this is a false understanding. Ayurveda and yoga both have used meat and still do recommend meat for when it is necessary. So in both of these philosophies, and particularly in Ayurveda, everything is an energy, which means that every energy format has some ways to heal us, to bring us, whether it's our body or mind or the ecology at large, back into balance. And so I'm particularly really passionate about cell-based meat because where we stand today in terms of our earth ecology and economy and the human ecology and economy, I think this path that we are on is one that is going to be highly beneficial for those who prefer to eat meat because of whatever, or for someone like myself who's not used to eating meat and I have to either pay extra money to get clean meat or choose to partake in other processes which would provide care for myself.
Great, thank you so much.
Yeah.
Sarah, do you want to go next?
Sure, I'm ready.
Awesome.
So hi everyone, great to be here. Great to see some of my family and some of my colleagues in the Jewish environmental education movement on this wonderful chat. Thank you, Wendy, for having me. And I'm gonna talk briefly about my thoughts as a vegan, but I'm mostly gonna be talking about how I think this might work for kosher consumers, kosher meat consumers. So first I'll say that I'm one of those vegans, you might even say I'm like the reverse of our last panelist. I grew up eating all kinds of things. I did not grow up keeping kosher. I actually had a pescatarian. One of my parents was pescatarian. And then I started keeping kosher, which I'll say more about what that is in a minute, but that significantly reduced my meat consumption. And when I went vegan, which was about 12 years ago, it was really an environmental decision more than an animal rights or animal welfare decision. I found that it was the most easiest way to be consistent with my values, and I felt good about making a positive ethical decision multiple times a day. Since then, I have lived on a farm, on a small farm that raised animals for food, both dairy and meat, chickens and goats and ducks. And I also worked for many years in farm animal protection and the movement for higher welfare animal products and meat reduction in general. And I have to say, there's a pretty good chance that if I knew 12 years ago what I know now, I probably wouldn't have become vegan. I would have gone to some sort of more locavore, meat minimalist diet. And so it's funny because even though I love Beyond Meat and I enjoy those meat analogs, and I don't have a desire to eat cellular, let's say hamburger or chicken or fish. I feel like I might try it for fun or something like that. But in this moment, if you were to just like put out a huge table of it for me, there's not a part of me that would be like, oh, I can't wait to eat that. But I do think it's very, very important for solving all kinds of environmental, social, and economic issues. And I'm really, really glad that we're talking about it. So I'm going to talk about kosher and kosher meat. What's very interesting actually is, we've mostly been talking about cellular agriculture in terms of meat, but there's also some amazing companies, not just fish, but also dairy and eggs. And the kosher laws that people observe today in their diet that Jews all over the world observe, they go all the way back to the Bible. And there's certain things that have to do with what you can and can't eat that are very, very ancient. and in modern times are regulated by some rabbinic administrations. So rabbinic bodies, groups of rabbis who make decisions and put actually symbols on the food so that you know whether or not that you can buy it. So while there is in the progressive Jewish communities, more liberal communities, what's sometimes called eco-kosher, where people are kind of like making up their own ethical systems, when I'm talking in the rest of this time about kosher, what I really mean is kosher certified. So there's a third party that's overseeing the entire process that's making the food kosher. So even if an average person is like, well, I would eat that. That sounds interesting. Most people who keep strict kosher, or a restaurant that serves kosher food, we're talking about certified kosher, as opposed to what we might call like the spirit of the law versus the letter of the law. So I'm really talking about the letter of the law, and this is really a legal system for observant Jews. What's important for people to understand is because of how the kosher meat industry is managed, at a certain point, there's probably going to be one mainstream decision and then some outliers. So for example, right now the companies that are based in Israel, which I know from listening to Alex's podcast is one of the top 3 or 4 countries that are really working on this issue. What I would guess is going to happen is that one of those companies in Israel is going to come out with a product, and because of their long-term relationships with rabbis in the rabbinic authorities in Israel, whatever those rabbis say is going to be what's going to pave the way for all of the other meat companies in terms of kosher. So here's what you need to know about kosher. So what makes something kosher, if I'm holding something in front of me and I want to know it's kosher, I'm going to ask a lot of questions about the origin of that food item. If we're talking about flesh, animal flesh, if it's a fish, it has to have fins and scales. If it's a mammal, it has to have split hooves and chew its cud. Birds gets much more complicated. There's no exact rule, but basically it can't be a bird of prey, has a crop, it has an extra finger on its foot. And then there are just birds that we don't know why they are or not kosher. They're just kind of on a list that was literally in the Bible. And then of course we have meat and dairy being kept separate. And there are very specific animals that aren't kosher, that are very common, like pork or shellfish. But then we also have strange situations like a giraffe is technically kosher, but no one knows how to slaughter a giraffe, so we don't eat it. So the other thing that makes an animal kosher is that it's slaughtered in a kosher method. So that means the animal has to be alive and healthy on the day that the animal is slaughtered. So we can't have pre-slaughter stunning, which is very common outside the kosher meat industry. Also, a really important part of that is the animal needs to be completely dead before you can eat the meat. So there's actually a law that, again, goes all the way back to the Bible. You can't cut off a leg of an animal and then maybe the animal thumps away and somehow survives and then eat that leg. If part of the animal is still alive, you actually can't eat that leg that you cut off. So that's a very interesting idea, because when we're talking about where the cells are coming from, that ends up being very significant. And when we want to think about if cultured meat can be considered kosher, there's actually a number of possible answers to that question. One is, let's say it is kosher, and then is it considered meat? For example, we have something where we can derive something from an animal, such as gelatin. So we could have kosher gelatin that's derived from beef, but it's such a tiny, tiny, tiny amount that you can't even see it, that some kosher authorities would consider that parv. Parv means neutral. And so there's an idea that we could actually have some authorities would say that we would extract cells from an animal, but it's so far removed from the animal that it's no longer considered meat. It is kosher, but it's somehow neutral. And then the other option is it could be dairy if it's from a dairy, and then a dairy animal, or it could be decided that it's completely off limits. And in general, when there's a new product out, or there's, this could even be something like electricity or just any sort of new invention that doesn't correspond to something that's already written down in the ancient texts. So the rabbis will sit around and they'll say, well, what question is this answering? And their first instinct is always to be, it's not allowed. why should we even ask the question? Because once you start asking the question, then you bring up more problems than you started with. So the fact that we have some really compelling reasons to be asking this question in the first place is going to be very important to the kosher authorities. The fact that there's environmental benefit, the fact that we're going to be able to feed more people for less money in the long term, the fact that most animals that we're eating are suffering on factory farms, and it's actually a biblical commandment to prevent animal suffering. So when you take all those things together, there's a very compelling argument to figure out if kosher could be allowed. So in general, most people I've talked to and most things I've read is that if the original cell, again, even if it's just one cell that's been fed and then another generation, if the original cell is from a dead animal, it's not going to be able to be kosher because of all the things I said before. And again, if it's from a living animal, it also might not be able to be kosher. But if it's from an animal that was slaughtered according to kosher rules and it's from a kosher animal, then there's a chance that it could be kosher. And those are the main questions that, I think that you want to be, thinking about. And of course, these questions about how are the cells fed and et cetera are also really important. But the main questions is the animal alive or dead? And is it from a kosher animal? I think it's pretty unlikely that we're going to see kosher, like shellfish being deemed kosher or pork being deemed kosher, even if it's made through the same methodology where like the first cell is so many generations back. Because we also have this concept in kosher called maris ayin, which is like, you don't want to make something look like it's kosher, even if it's not. Because then if you see someone eating like a bunch of bacon, you're like, but there's no way that's kosher. And then someone might just think that all bacon is kosher. So they would still probably end up keeping certain categories of foods and only making kosher the cellular meat from kosher.
Oh, wow. Thank you so much. That's fascinating. And I really appreciate all the different perspectives that you gave on that as well. So thank you. Carrie is our next panelist. You want to go ahead and let us know your thoughts, Carrie?
Thank you very much, Wendy, for organizing and very nice meeting every one of you. Sorry I'm being late, but I'll quickly answer the panel question. And so about myself, I've been vegan for the past 4 years each. Before that, I eat everything, meat, seafood, and everything. I turned vegan because I am aware at that point, knowing the environmental impact of our food supply chain on the environment. And it seems like it does not make sense, because if everyone is just eating all of the meat and then we need so much resources to derive those meats, then the more population we have on this planet is not going to be sustainable. And of course, on the other hand, I learned a lot more about what is happening in the agriculture industry. And for example, getting milk, the cow would be, consuming some of the material and food that help them to produce more milk, etc. And I personally find that taking away those unintended, people, as one of the other panelists mentioned, there are some ingredient in the meats that is, useful for the body, but in the food supply chain, there are a lot of things that go into that is unintended totally, and we actually not knowing it, consuming it so much, and that's give us the side effects that we don't like. For example, after taking off dairy, because maybe some of the thing in it, I feel much better in my system, and so I think that is the unintended and unfavorable part of the food chain ingredient that go into that I would like to avoid by being a vegan. And of course, for example, to introduce, I'm from Avant Meats. We're working on cell-based fish. And so for fish meat, as I dig into more details of it, I find that, of course, it's also in the news now, we would be unintentionally eating microplastic in the fish fillet that we're having, not even knowing it. So I think that's kind of scary. So then when we started the company, and we actually realized that this is a very pragmatic way so that we can also have the meat without all of these problems on the environment and also problem in the food supply chain. So that's why this is we started this in 2018, late 2018. And in particular, I would like to mention about the meat consumption in this part of the world. I'm situated in Hong Kong now, and of course, we are very close to China market. We go there, and then meat consumption in China is really increasing. It is a developing economy, and when I go across the border to Shenzhen or visited various cities in the country, I can see if I go into a restaurant, that would be, as a vegan, I would like to look for like vegetable dishes. But it is basically, in a lot of cases, it's not possible because people consume or demand for meat is so high, people have more disposable income, and then they would like to treat themselves with more meat. And so this is together with the explosion of the population in China, or these two factors become a very major problem. For example, for the meat market, the fish market, that we look at the value, China per capita consumption is actually double of the global average. So in China, people are consuming on average over 40 kg of fish and seafood combined per year, while the global average is just half of that. So imagine the population together with that, it is a very big problem. So that's why we like to focus on this issues that entails. And so turning to the religion and the way the relationship between human and also meat, I like to bring up two aspects. One, they are a little bit contradictory, which is very interesting. In this part of the world, there are the most common religion, of course, we have different kind of religion here, Christianity, Catholicism, and also Buddhism and Taoism. And one of the more common in this, maybe in Hong Kong or in the larger region, is Taoism and Buddhism. And people do practice 2 days of vegetarian per calendar month. So the 1st and the 15th of the lunar calendar, people who are dedicated to the religion, they will skip meat. So they will just eat vegetables. And a lot of the time, because dairy is not a very it's not primary staple in the food that we eat. So a lot of the time it would be vegan if they also take away the egg. The reason for doing that is really for anti-animal cruelty. So they believe, Taoism do believe the reincarnation, and then they would like to do, contribute whatever they have with this karma and that kind of concept. So people skip meat for 2 days, but for the rest of the month, people just eat whatever they like. It's pretty heavy in meat eating. Hong Kong is a destination for a lot of good quality beef and seafood and everything. So so that's very contradictory kind of behavior. And on the other hand, I grow up, I'm not very young, I'm not too old, but still in my generation, we are very used to going and seeing wet markets. So wet market is where you pass by. As a kid, I go with my mom, and then there are actually butcher. There are also like shop selling chicken and also selling fish that you can actually see the animal alive. And then people will point to that animal, oh, I want to get that. And then the shop owner, they'll just get that animal and actually kill that animal in front of you. But it might be less so nowadays because of the couple of episodes of swine flu, bird flu, and it's basically very much scaled down. But this is what a lot of the people in this part of the world grow up seeing. So not saying that people are oblivious to that, but imagine that is really in the background of the mind. So animal cruelty scenes does not trigger as much of horror or shock as people grow up. They've seen, for example, some documentary like Earthlings. Some of the people might have seen those pictures in wet market before, not meaning cow or pig, but some other animals they have seen that before. So they have already built some tolerance of that. So I think for this part of the world, when we talk about veganism, people would turn to veganism because mostly religion as well as some environmental or health concern like what I've mentioned. And so that's why I see, coupled with the growing demand for meat, and also the environmental impact of that. And I do see the clean meat and cultivated meat is offering a very pragmatic solution for this region, because people basically they would still continue with this habit. And I see that is actually increasing in terms of demand. And we definitely, and on the other hand, I have been in the position where I would like to influence people to be taking more plant-based diet, but you know, it is easier said than done. So it will not come in a time that we can really help with the planet. So I think that the quicker we have the cultivated meat product that is convincing and, you know, popular among consumers, the earlier we can have some turnaround in the situation of the environment. So this is what we think. That's what I think. Thank you for the opportunity, Wendy.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Carrie. That was super, super enlightening. And I'm really looking forward to hearing more about Avant Meats and the products you all are bringing to market and when that happens. So keep us posted, and yeah, really, really exciting stuff.
Definitely. Thank you.
Our next panelist is Veronica.
Hi there, everyone. A bit about me. So I'm not vegan myself. I actually come from the dark side of business and economics, much to the disappointment of my parents. But that means that, look, as an economist, I am interested in efficiency. And the truth is right now, from my perspective, working in the alternative dairy space, animal farming is not sustainable and it's not efficient anymore. I think now more than ever, we're about to see a monumental shift in consumer eating habits, if that wasn't happening already, right? I think on the other side of, you know, this great unknown situation that we're facing right now, I think that food security and having independent local supply chains are going to be more important than ever before. And we're seeing that now because trade borders are being locked down as we speak. Supply chains are being completely disrupted. We can't get what we expect from the supermarket within a 2-hour delivery time frame on Amazon, and people are losing it because of it. Including me. But I think that's going to be, you know, incredibly important coming over to the other side of the situation. And then secondly, I think environmental resilience is going to be the other thing. And when we're talking about the plant-based, cell-based space, I think that the environmental sustainability aspect of that has been a bit of a secondary thought so far. I think, you know, we've focused a lot around just getting these products developed first and researching them, which is critical, and it's a huge step forward. I think what will happen, you know, maybe a year or two down the track is then refining that research and working out, all right, now let's, in some cases, look at all the crap that's gone into it, all of the numbers, all of the chemicals, all of the genetically modified ingredients, and hang on, weren't we just arguing about GMO a few years ago and how bad it was for us all? Suddenly that's the solution. So I think that the next step after this will be looking at, all right, we've worked out what the next step forward is. Now, how do we make it better again, and better for our bodies and better for the planet in the long run? So in terms of not being vegan myself, to me, I consider veganism as activism, I guess. I would never be able to call myself that if I'm not actively out there, you know, adhering to a diet like that with 100% commitment all the way down to the type of medication that I take and whether or not that was tested on animals, right? But I do have a plant-based company myself. We make fermented cheeses made from cauliflower and hemp seed, and we're aggressively not vegan in the way that we market it because that's not the audience that we're looking for. I think people that are vegan consumers already know what they want to eat. They're already fully educated on that. The people that I think we still need to convince are the other 99% of consumers that would just as happily eat a normal, you know, block of cheddar or wheel of brie on the supermarket shelf. So to us, if we can create something that tastes just as good, that consumers would choose it over cheddar, and is at the same price point, then that's compelling from an economic perspective. And so that's what we focus on with grounded foods.
Oh, great. Thank you so much, Veronica. Super, super appreciate that. And also best of luck with grounded foods. I think right now during this coronavirus epidemic, you know, we're seeing a lot of need for more plant-based solutions because supply chains are getting, you know, they're unknown how everything is going to kind of end up in a couple weeks. So I think so, yeah.
Interesting time to start launching a business, right?
Yeah, and I think it's also an interesting time to be speaking about cell-based meat, because this is, something where, at scale, I think companies will not necessarily need to rely on so many factors, right? Like people to come in and feed the animals and slaughter the animals and things like that. It's definitely been something we've been tracking as far as this whole crisis has grown, as, how are the farmers doing? How's the supply chain going? So yeah, it's going to be an interesting time to see what happens. Our next speaker is Ahmed.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for the opportunity and having me over here. It's amazing how in the depth of all of us, we are 100% similar. Religions and backgrounds and cultures and whatever your color is. It's just even the religions, like when Sarah was talking about the ethics behind the halal or the kosher meat is extremely similar in Islam, except with few points. In Islam, we actually go a little bit deeper into the ethics behind it. But a little bit about me, my background. I'm Egyptian, Muslim, been raised and born and raised in Egypt up until I was 26, and then most of my adult life were basically around the world, from Dubai to Australia, Qatar, and here in the US. Visited around 17 other countries. So it has been definitely a ride, an amazing ride that allowed me to see various cultures and various countries and how they are, indulging themselves into the meat-eating habits or vegetables, whatever, in terms of their cuisines. About halal meat, there are a little bit more, as I said, in terms of diving deep into the ethics behind it. First of all, the cruelty for treating the animal was not supposed to be there from day one. I think it was one of the Prophet Muhammad's best companions. He was named or he was being called all the time as the father of the kitten, because he had always a kitten in the gap of his dish dash, always going with him everywhere. And Prophet Muhammad has many sayings about how to be, passionate and treating animals without cruelty. One, cruelty is not supposed to be there. Two, when you are bringing the animal to the slaughterhouse, the animal should be in a calm state. Two, the knife that you are cutting with should be extremely sharp, that the animal does not feel the extreme cut, if it's possible, and you are not allowed to go back and forth. That is a form of torture. It is not allowed in Islam. It should be one cut and that's it. If you have to go at it again, you go as swift as possible at the same location, and you're not supposed to go on any other location. The other thing, the third part is you're not supposed to cut the neck of the animal 100% complete, because once you do that, there's a nerve in the upper vertebrae that if you cut it, then it causes the heart of the animal to have I don't know how to describe that, but the heart like just stops pumping the blood. And when you do that, then that's the worst thing that you can do, because the whole point of that process is releasing all the blood, because this is where the bacteria is mostly living in. So, and after that, what you should do is you just leave it at peace. You do not tie it. You do not do anything. If you want to know for a fact that it was drained 100% or almost close 100% from the blood, you have to hang it upside down, and you're not supposed to, again, to treat it with cruelty or to just snatch it from its legs or whatever. And then most of all, after the slaughter operation, then you are supposed to give some of that meat to the boar. Here is a very, very interesting point right now. I think it's not about eating halal meat or it's not about eating meat or being a vegetarian. It's about the ethics of the individual that have those values. Every single time Prophet Muhammad mentioned about having something new, including whether it's a new meal, whether it's a new even dress, shoe or something, he mentioned immediately right after, whether it's in the Quran or in his words, he immediately mentioned to give something in return. In fact, he at one point mentioned in the Quran that if you were to actually get that new thing and find yourself loving it so much and you give it away, then you're going to be my companion in heaven. So because you have controlled your self urges. And going back to the subject of giving away from the meat, have we actually tried to control our manners in our consumption for meat in general and follow some of those rules of giving some of that meat to the boar? I don't believe that in the grand scheme of things, there would have been a much better portion handling and much better approach to that issue. And we wouldn't find a big problem in the current problem with food worldwide. So even it is actually one of our five main pillars of Islam. It's the zakat, which is giving part of your money. I think it's around 3% of your money that you have saved over a year and have accumulated. You must, this is one of the five main pillars, you must give some of that for the poor. Again, it's all about ethics and about how you approach that subject. I'm myself a firm believer that you're allowed to eat whatever it is that you can eat, except for, as a Muslim, what was mentioned, that it's not halal in Islam, which is pork, and it begs anything derivative of that animal. I myself tried it once by mistake. I did not like it. That's as far as for this. We eat everything. I personally eat everything except for anything derivative of pigs, or I think it's called catfish. So anything else, I welcome it. But there is another piece of data point that you probably might find it interesting. Animals were mentioned in the Quran around 16 times. The way that they were mentioned in a form of a meal as a meat. Fish was mentioned 2 times, and meat as in meat was mentioned 2 times. The rest of the entire Quran mentioned vegetables so many times, from banana to figs to pomegranate to olives to name it. There is around 12, if I'm not mistaken with the number, 12 fruits and vegetables mentioned in the Quran. And when you look at those ratios, you actually can see the wisdom behind, God telling us what should we do in terms of our utilization for the resources under our hands. So I personally try to do that all the time. I have been failing miserably, mainly because I played rugby as a professional player and I needed more protein and all that. So anyway, I hope that was some valuable information for your kind self. And yeah, that's it.
Thank you so much, Ahmed. And I love your point at the end about finding balance, you know, regardless of what type of protein it is, but really making sure that you balance that, you know, and with vegetables and the other things that are available to us. Cool. Alex, do you want to take it away?
Yeah, thank you. Dietary preference, I guess I have grown up, my parents are from Iran, so I've avoided things like pork growing up, but never took that very seriously, and then started eating really all types of meat. And when I started looking into kind of new projects that I could get into, I had this group of friends that we were meeting pretty much every year for about 5-10 years, group of friends from college. And my girlfriend was in that group, and she was vegan, interested in cell-cultured meat, started talking about cell-cultured meat. Some of my other friends in this group, where we come up with different ideas and projects, started talking about, oh, you know, I've heard of cell-cultured meat, that's interesting. And that's what kind of led us to the discussion of, we're going to start a cultured meat company. We didn't end up doing that. Instead, to learn more about the space, we started a podcast. And that's kind of how we got into it. Going back to my personal dietary preferences, I don't have any restrictions or anything like that, but I am, you know, vegan, I would say 6 out of the 7 days, or maybe even more. Now that we're in quarantine, I don't really cook with any meat or animal products. And it's not something I will say no to, but it's not really something I seek out, which has been interesting because the cell-cultured meat industry has a large group of people that are in there that come from an animal welfare background. And so it's been really interesting to kind of navigate through that. One thing that I've learned is that I usually don't ask people, are you vegan? I ask them, are you plant-based? Because even somebody who is vegan sometimes might say, well, I did have cheese one time, so I can't really say that I'm vegan, or maybe they'll say I'm vegetarian. And I can definitely relate to that now as well. That's in a nutshell a little bit about me. I did mention kind of like a little bit of a history of cell-cultured meat earlier. One thing that I would like to add is, and that I kind of glossed over, was terminology. And it's interesting because we heard, I think Deepika was mentioning clean meat, the term clean meat. Over the years, cell-cultured meat has been called so many different things. I think, as early as like in vitro meat, Franken meat, artificial meat, synthetic meat, all these strange terms. Eventually that kind of solidified into some other things like pure meat. And then eventually now we're calling it cell-based meat, cellular meat, some people call it cultivated meat. And I think one other distinction that I'd like to make is that, and I think this might have popped up in the questions too, is that cell-cultured meat is very different from what's very popular now, which is these plant-based meats like Beyond Meat or Impossible Foods. But I'm sure we'll get into that a little bit later. So that's a little bit about me. I will say that I have tried cell-cultured meat on 2 different occasions. And the only thing that I'll mention is that it did have like a taste of that animal that it came from. But on both occasions, it was just such a small amount that it was more of a novelty than anything else.
Great. Thanks so much for sharing, Alex. I was wondering if you had tried any yet. I haven't gotten to, but it sounds like this is all going to happen quite soon. One question I do want to address from the comments is how close will it be to real meat, since there's different cuts of meat and things like that? From my knowledge of the people that I've talked to in the industry, they're working on specific popular cuts right now. So for example, Wild Type is a cell-based salmon company that's based out of the West Coast here in the US. And they're doing a fillet of salmon. That's what they're working on right now. But they also know that, people do want other parts of the animal, but they're working on the most popular one right now. I think it gets a little bit more complicated once you leave the fish category and you're working on something that maybe, like pork, where you've got pork chops and pork bellies and different things. But the goal is to be able to replicate each of the different types of muscle and fat combinations that you would find on an animal. Does anybody have anything to add to that, Alex or Carrie?
Yeah, I'll jump in really quick. So definitely right, everything you mentioned. I think, starting out, we'll probably see more of these mincemeat or ground meat type of products come into the market first. It'll be a little bit more time before we have more of a structured product. There is one company in Israel, Aleph Farms, and they're creating their main project is a steak. And so they're multiplying the cells in the same way that everybody else is, but then they're getting fitted into this scaffold of sorts that gives it that structure and taste. And so I think that is kind of yet to come in terms of what we'll see. We'll probably start seeing more products come to market first that might seem like they're more of like processed food. So an example would be chicken nuggets, meatballs, and things like that.
Cool. Well, it's just about 6 o'clock, and I know some of the panelists probably have to drop off. I do want to say we can stay on for a few more minutes if people have other questions, or if there's a particular topic someone in the audience would like to discuss. Just go ahead and throw it in the chat, and I will address it with everybody. But I do want to thank everybody for being a part of this. And, I've learned so much personally. So thank you all for just bringing so much great cultural goodness and information and content to this discussion. And then we can keep going if you guys want. Cool.
Thank you. Thank you, Wendy. I just, before I skip off, thank you for organizing and also touch on the different cuts, right? That the last question mentioned is that, in terms of the product development, we do need to work on, because as you might have read, it's about the cell and also the scaffold, the structure that allow the cell to grow into the pattern, as you said, the distribution of the fat, muscle, and different kind of connective tissue. So for different cuts, we do need to kind of tailor-make the scaffold and a little bit of the process. So each of the product development would need to do that. So as what Alex mentioned, initially, grounded may be the easiest, the fastest product to go in the market. Later on, as different company, they have established the very first core product. In our case, we work with some more homogeneous product as well as some also fillet kind of version as well towards later part of this year. But I see that in the future, each of this product development flow, just like any food product, food company, they would need to take, will still be, the turnaround time will be still at least like 3 months to 6 months before they come up with another, like the texture and structure, and also put it in the whole production process that can produce different cuts if you talk about that very specifically. And so, but we think that it is working in this direction, as well as some of the scaffold, looking into doing degradable scaffold. So at the beginning, it might be some kind of hybrid combination of plant-based materials with some cell, but ultimately, in our case, we're also working on some degradable. So ultimately, there would not be plant ingredient in that, but just the cell in that will be 100% at that point would be like the meat exactly. So I think this is moving in that direction. Of course, it would take a couple of years of time to reach that. So that's my hope to share on that point before I leave the conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Carrie. I appreciate that. There's one question about socioculturally, how to get people, like how to convince consumers to try this out and, you know, be open to it.
It's something that I actually wanted to raise and get feedback from some of the other panelists about, actually. Not coming from the cell-based meat space myself, I do wonder how people are going to adopt it over time. Personally, as someone that I grew up with very hippie-like parents who brought me up on an all-natural, like preservative-free diet, nothing with numbers, nothing like that. So there's something inherently in me that resists the idea of eating anything that's been grown in a lab, right? But I think that given what's going on at the moment, I think that that's all about to change. Like, we're living in a new normal right now. And I think that in a couple of months' time, people are all around the world are going to be so used to just living in an environment they've never seen before. I actually see this as a huge opportunity to get mass consumer uptake in a very short amount of time. I'd love to know what the rest of you think.
I will like to actually address that. And at the very beginning, you mentioned something about, I think you're a specialist in consumer behavior. As a startup founder, when we design anything that we are going to produce to consumers, we have to understand the decision-making cycle first, and then find out where's the weakest link in that process, and then attack it from there, and then attack one chain at the time, or one link at the time. I would speak about the part of the world where I'm from, and this is only my own humble opinion. Because of our understanding that, so there's a little bit of silliness when we think about it. God is the provider. He's not going to forget us. He's merciful, but everybody is watching what's happening around the world. I think when we will be introduced to something like that, we will be extremely skeptical about how good is it, where it came from, and that point will have to be discussed deeply, because as Sarah mentioned, that it came from a halal process, halal process of slaughtering the animal or not, because if it's not, then it's not halal to begin with. Now, the other factor is how that cell was reproduced, or how is that process came along? Is it like the speed of it? Does that make it as close to the same original cell or not? What's the rules and regulations around it? What the science says about it? The speed of the process is extremely critical element. I would say also there is some other things that goes into that specific point. And then after that, how you present it to the consumer, and are they basically responding to a pain because there is a pandemic of basically, or there's an issue or a problem around the world that there's not enough meat? Is that a good time, or how to present that to them? There's so many elements. As investors usually would come across that subject, they would say there's a lot of logistical issues, including educational issues that you will have to face when you are presenting that to a specific part of the world, that they don't have the necessary education to observe such a suggested subject. That's my take on it. I have tried something recently. It was, I think, vegetables. My wife got it. It was vegetables that tasted like meat. And I absolutely fell in love with it. I was like, let's make more of that, you know. So I guess this also shows you something, that the unexpected factor of finding out about something that tastes exactly like meat, and me liking it, and then I'm saying, oh, okay, let's save the world, and indulge ourselves into this, trying to help the world, and there's a lot of factors that has to be taken in consideration, and I believe it's going to be a little bit harder than the usual in some parts of the world. That's my take on it.
Yeah, I think it's going to be very specific, for sure.
I wanted to sort of write on that statement and bring up some of the stuff that I sort of get to deal with in a sort of one-on-one with patients, with clients, when it comes to educating doctors on preventing chronic diseases, which can easily be managed by diets and lifestyle choices. And so there's a couple of things that Ahmed said, Veronica said, Alex said, everybody said such wonderful things. And I have so much going on in my head right now that I know that we don't have a lot of time. So I want to be skillful in the way that I pose a question to my peers here. Is that one of the main questions that I sort of get to sit with at the end of the day after seeing patients is, what is the food that we are creating, this opportunity that we have in this very exciting field, will it also serve all? Will it serve the population that does not have access to, let's say, Beyond Burger, that wants to, let's say, reverse type 2 diabetes, or wants to prevent heart disease, or maybe they're migrant workers in India right now who are not able to work and they don't have access to food, right? So my question as a doctor, as a healer, and as just a human being are these really fundamental questions for every human being. Is this something that's going to be available to all people? Because food, as we have found out, at least in the last 20 years of what this world has become, is that food is not a fad. Food is not a fact. Food is a necessity for survival, and it must be for all. And so to those who are doing so much for our climate and working in this technology, that is one question that I have not been able to find on the internet or have come across. Is that how is this going to play into also solving world hunger? How is this going to help in solving things like heart diseases? And if the technology is there for us to better the environment, is this meat going to do something where people will not necessarily have to worry so much about consuming meat to worry about heart diseases or whatever the factors are? So that is one question that I have that, Wendy, maybe could be addressed later, I don't know. And then the second thing, Ahmed, you said something about ethics, and then Suman, one of the members in the audience right now, just private messaged me and asked me, what are my thoughts? He asked, I'm so sorry, I lost the question because there are so many comments. Regarding popularization and cultural acceptance of cell-based meat among the Indian population in relation to ethnic background. Yeah, so I can't speak for 1.2 billion of us. It's just impossible. I just cannot carry the entire country of India on my shoulder and speak for each and every one of them. But what I am seeing is that in the last 10 years, India has begun to consume a lot more meat than when I was growing up, Suman, and maybe probably when you were growing up as well. And now what I'm seeing is that as the East is, meaning the India, is borrowing also Western fads and culture, you are now seeing Indians go back to some of the traditional practices of drinking haldi doodh, which is golden milk, or a turmeric latte, depending on wherever you are living. Ghee, which was shunned as I was growing up, because it was just considered like the death of all. Well, meanwhile, right now here, everybody's just can't get enough of ghee. And then the third thing is that veganism in India is really, really, really growing exponentially as well. So I think, as Suman, to your point, I think at some point India is going to synthesize, much like we are still synthesizing here in America. And so you're going to have the next generation and the following generation who's going to be much more on board. And from an economic standpoint, business is going to follow where the population is. And as I'm sure, as you know, there are so many companies investing in India right now for that very specific reason. I hope that answers your question for now.
Great. And I'm just going to speak to one more thing that you just mentioned, Dee, about availability to all, and anybody else, please feel free to chime in. But from all of the folks that I've interviewed at different cell-based meat companies, their goal really is to get the cell-based meat that they produce to be at least on par with the price of meat currently, if not lower. And this is not just like the normal price of meat, like the stuff that's on sale at the grocery store, but they want it to be on par or less expensive than very, the most natural, organic, clean meat that you can find. And I will say also that one of the other benefits that we didn't really touch on too much about cell-based meat is the fact that, because it's being grown in a lab or in a large manufacturing facility that's under very strict conditions, there's no need for antibiotics or hormones to be added into the meat. So it is a little bit cleaner, if you will, and there's a lot of food safety issues that we're seeing recently with E. coli and different other bacteria getting into foods, and these are things that will not necessarily be an issue moving forward with cell-based or clean meat because of the conditions that they're being grown in. They're not, they're not feeding the animals stuff that could possibly contaminate the meat and stuff like that. So that's hopefully answering most of your guys' questions. Again, kind of as Alex said at the beginning, we won't actually know until these companies are a little bit scaling up a little bit, what the actual prices of things are going to be, how efficient or inefficient they're going to be compared to traditional agriculture. But things are moving really, really fast in this space. So hopefully we'll start to see some of these meats and proteins on our table soon. And yeah, let's hope for the best. I think this technology is really changing the potential that we have for how agriculture is going to be in the future. And so let's hope it actually does all the things that it promises to do. Thank you guys so much for being a part of this. And thanks to all the audience for watching. This has been awesome. We will definitely have more of these from Evolve.ag. And I think the online forum is working pretty well. So we'll keep with that for now. But until next time, thank you guys all so much for being a part of this and viewing. And if you guys have any questions, if anyone wants to be put in touch with a particular panelist, feel free to email me. My email is at info@evolve.ag. That's Evolve.ag. So yeah, hit me up if you guys have any questions. And thank you so much for being a part of it.
Thank you, Wendy.
Thank you.
Wendy.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you. Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you.
Bye. Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.